Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome back to the Arturia B3-V tutorial series. This is the last episode in the series. Usually at the end of a tutorial series, I do a set of preset deep dives. In the case of the organ, it's a relatively simple sound, and so I don't really want to over-egg the pudding. We can talk about everything that we need to do in terms of putting all of this stuff together. Hopefully in a single episode. That's what we're going to do today. Before we set off on that, please have a look at the Patreon link below. If you've enjoyed this series, I'd really appreciate you checking that out. Great way to help support me and my channel. And we're going to use the Delay Riley preset today, and the main reason is that it uses a few modulation pages, so it gives us plenty of stuff to talk about. Firstly, let's just hear the sound. Now I'm going to press a single note, a C, and I'm going to hold it down for a while. Let's hear what happens. It's as if it's playing different notes. You know, there's definitely something happening I happen to know it's every 4 seconds, but there's something happening here that we need to figure out. There's also, a lot of richness to the sound. It's a very harmonically rich sound, so we'll figure out where all of that's coming from today. First thing that I'm going to do is jump over to the FX page and turn all of the effects off. We'll come back to them, but just for now, I'm going to turn everything off. Press the same note. So it's a simpler sound. We've lost some of that interest, but it's still reasonably complex. It's coming from the modulation page. We have multiple drawbar modulators in operation here. Before we have a look at any of them, I'm just going to pull the envelope values down a little bit. Don't really need very much attack, and I want much less release. Don't want the sound hanging around for so long every time I press a key. Okay, it's much more controlled now. And we've got 4 drawbar modulators, but a really common trap to fall into is failing to identify which ones are attacking the upper manual and which ones are dealing with the lower manual. Because this 4th modulator isn't doing anything on the upper manual, but it is operating on the lower. So let's deal with that one first, get it out of the way. I'll switch my keyboard to split mode so I've got access to the lower keyboard. So this pulsing thing. Turn the LFO off. There's the natural sound of just the organ. And we've got this saw effect applying the modulation to the manuals. So it's literally as if it's pushing all of those drawbars, or pulling those drawbars out to tonally affect the sound brutally, with the vertical climb of a sawtooth, and then sliding them down every quarter note. The fact that it's 188 degrees out of phase means basically it's starting off, every time you press a note, it's not immediately jumping up to the maximum extent. I'm just going to pull these attack and release down as well, make them a little bit less silly. So with regular phase, I have to press lots of keys really to make it trigger. With no phase, you can hear that click as it's leaping up to the highest possible modulation setting before even kicking off. That's the only interesting thing going on in the lower manual really, so we can ignore that now. Head back to the upper manual again. I'll put myself back in multi-mode so that I can press any of the keys. Okay, let's identify that unusual step thing first. I'm not going to hand out any prizes for you figuring out that it's the step sequencer that's doing it. So here we've got our 4-second step length, and every 4 seconds it switches to a new modulation point and either modulates the drawbar's current setting positively or negatively, depending on what the step is set to. Okay, and having figured out what that does, let's turn it off. So what are the other two modulators doing? They're both sine waves. One of them's operating every 4 beats, so very, very slowly indeed. One of them's operating at a dotted eighth, which is pretty fast. Let's turn the dotted eighth one off and listen to the slow, probably evolving sound. You can see in Insight the wave morphing. If I turn it off, the wave's now static. So over the period of that sine wave, again, it's modulating those drawbars, virtually pushing them in, pulling them out in this kind of slow, undulating way. That's all very well and good. The second sine wave isn't doing that at all. Let's turn it back on. Remember that when you disable these drawbar modulators, it doesn't lose the data. It's always there. You can just bring it back. Let's hear what this one's doing. Now this is a really interesting effect. It's another tonal filter, but it's operating so quickly as to create a kind of psychoacoustic effect. It's tricking your ears into thinking that it's like a tremolo effect, because as the different frequencies get pulled in and out, your brain really can't keep up and it ends up sounding a little bit like tremolo. But it isn't, it's a modulating filter. Let's take that away. So now we've thrown all the modulation away, let's head back over to the FX tab and see what these effects are doing. Well, delay is always the easiest to deal with. You can hear the ping pong with the stereo spread. If I turn stereo off, you'll lose that ping pong effect because everything's just going to be right down the middle. Maximum stereo. If you're listening to that in headphones, you'll hear it bouncing. That's what ping pong does. And we've also got low pass and high pass filters. So these filters only apply to the repeats. So if I put an 8K high pass filter on, it means it's going to throw away all the low pitches on all of the delayed repeats. Bit too violent. There. You're only hearing the upper frequencies. Similarly with the low pass filter, if I bring that right down, it's going to throw all the high stuff away and we'll be left with a very dull repeating sound. That's all the frequencies left in. So it's a little bit weird with low pass and high pass filters. If you don't want them to do anything at all, turn the low pass filter all the way up, the high pass filter all the way down, and that'll give you all of your frequencies. Flanger. Doing a flanging thing. That's a little bit loud. Flangers do tend to get a little bit spiky, a little bit pokey. It's a bit more well behaved. If I flick this phase invert switch, it's going to sound dramatically different. I won't go into the full intricacies of what a flanger does, but basically it takes a copy of the sound, offsets it very slightly by certainly no more than 10 milliseconds. It's usually like 1, maybe even less than 1 millisecond, and applies essentially a vibrato to the delayed sound, mixes them back together again. That's what gives you the flange effect. If you flip one of those waves, you get a completely different sound. That's what the phase invert's doing. So here you can see it's cycling less than once a second. If I was able to carry on turning that up and turn my feedback down, I'd start getting the chorus effect instead. It's the same, almost the same audio effect. Flangers typically have LFO rates up to 10 milliseconds and include feedback. Choruses go past 10 milliseconds and typically don't have feedback. And that's basically the difference between the two. that's quite the dramatic flanger. I've got a bit of a bugbear about compressors being used on keyboard synthesizers. It's very rarely they have any value at all. If I put the attack and the release back on this sound, the compressor would just be completely pointless. If I take all of the attack and release away, however, you really hear the compressor pop. That's where they have some value, but this sound was absolutely awash in huge envelopes and big sweeping sounds. In that environment, you're not going to hear very much compression at all. Seems like a bit of a glorified and overcomplicated volume boost in this particular context, but that's basically what it's doing, squashing the sound a little bit and then boosting the whole thing to make it slightly louder. We did have the reverb turned on, but its dry is set to 0, which means you're not actually hearing the reverb. And it's really difficult to make it out with such a long release as well. There it is. Just wanted to say a few brief words about the rotary speaker as well, because we've not dealt with it explicitly. We've always got the option to turn the rotary speaker on. If you want to have it running, you need the amp mode to be set to rotary speaker. There it is. Rotary speakers, or this particular flavour of rotary speaker, there's different emulations to go at, have basically two different things spinning. You've got a horn at the top, literally a horn spinning around, and then at the bottom of the speaker you've got this big rotating drum. So there's two different ways that the rotary effect is generated, and that's what we're playing with these effects here. But just to the only reason I mention it is because it's usually plugged in to the MIDI settings to your modulation wheel. You see modulation wheel, which is CC1, is set to your rotary speaker. So that's me turning the modulation wheel up and back down again. Nice resounding C major to cap things off. Seems like a good place to stop. That's all for this video series. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, please hit the like button. I'll see you for the next one. Thanks a lot.